Untouchables or the Children of India's Ghetto by Babasaheb Ambedkar. Part 2, Chapter 6. 3. Under the established order, the untouchables have no right to education and certainly have no right to be admitted to the village school. Those untouchables who have dared to make a breach in these rules of the established order have been severely punished by the Hindus. The following are only a few of the numerous cases that have happened. From the Arya Gazette of Lahore, dated 30th June 1921, Mahashaya wrote an article in the paper Young India in which he reported that in district Surat there is a village called Sisodri. In a very short span of time, it has made such progress on the path of nationalism that it could be held up as a model of non cooperation. With all this, however, the old contempt for the Dalit remains. The writer says that in the nationalist school of that place, I saw a Dhed caste child sitting all apart in one corner of the classroom and proclaiming by his very looks that he was an untouchable. I asked the students why they did not let this boy sit with them, and they replied that this could not be until the Dalit left drinking wine and eating meat. The Dalit boy at once said that he had already given these up. The high caste students could say nothing now. From the Pratap of 12th February 1923, Mahashaya Sant Ramji has reported. It happened recently that a Brahmin teacher was appointed by the government to go and teach in a village school for Chamar boys. When he came there, the Brahmin, Kshatriyas, and others boycotted the teacher, saying, "You have come here to teach the Chamars and raise them to our level, have you?" From the page of 11th April 1924. Swami Shraddhanandji has written, there was a nationalist school in Khatsayas which I visited towards the end of November 1921. When I inquired how many Dalit children read there, I was told only 3, and they too sit outside the classroom in the veranda. In my lecture, I objected to this procedure and said that in a nationalist institution, it was only proper that these boys should be allowed to sit inside the classroom. The manager of the school acted on my advice. The next day, the benches of the school were all deserted. Until this day, the grand building of that nationalist school stands locked out and dreary. From Milap, dated 18th April 1924. Here is an incident from Hoshangabad. The district council sent a circular letter to the schools that the Dalit children should be educated in the schools. The headmasters began to act on the orders. When one of the schools admitted some Dalit children, the honorary magistrate took great offense at it and withdrew his children from that school. Other guardians also followed suit, and altogether got a meeting of the school committee convened, and resolutions passed in it that the education of Dalits in the school is against the public wishes. They said that after coming into contact with Dalits, the Brahmin children changed their Janeu. Therefore, this school committee could not undertake the education of Dalit children. From Pratap, dated 3rd April 1932. Ahmedabad, 1st April 1932. A report has been received from the village of Navagaon, Baroda state, that ever since the Dalit schools were closed down and permission given to the Dalits to enter the ordinary village schools, the villagers have been subjecting the Dalits to endless persecution. It is reported that the 1,000 stacks of hay belonging to Dalit farmers were burnt down. Kerosene oil has been sprinkled into the Dalit wells, an attempt made to set fire to their houses. A Dalit boy was assaulted on his way to school, and a general boycott of the Dalits has been declared. The Hindustan Times, in its issue of 26th May 1939, says several persons are reported to have raided a night school in village Katipur in the district where Kisans and others used to be taught. The teacher was caught hold of by them and asked to close the school on the ground that the boys of the Untouchables, after acquiring education, will begin to assert themselves to treat them on a footing of equality. When the teacher refused to do so, he was belabored and the students were asked to disperse. The last incidents I would like to refer occurred in the year 1935 in the village of Kavitha in Dholka Taluka of the Ahmedabad district of the Bombay Presidency. The incident occurred on 8th August 1935. As the Bombay government had issued orders requiring the admission of the children of the untouchables in private public schools, the untouchables of the village Kavitha thought of taking advantage of that order. What happened to them is reported below. On 8/8/1935, the untouchables of the village Kavitha took four of their children to be admitted in the village school. Much caste Hindus from the village had gathered near the school to witness this. This occasion for admission passed off quietly and nothing untoward happened. From the next day, however, the caste Hindus of the village withdrew their children from the school as they did not like their children sitting with those of the untouchables and getting themselves polluted. Some time thereafter, an untouchable from the village was assaulted by a Brahmin on 13th August 1935. The male members of the untouchables of the village had come to Dholka to file a criminal complaint against the Brahmin in the court of the magistrate. Coming to know that the adult members of the untouchables were absent, the Hindus of the village invaded the quarters of the untouchables. They were armed with sticks, spears, and swords. Among the invaders was caste Hindu women. They started attacking the old men and women of the untouchables. Some of the victims fled into the jungles, and some shut themselves up. These invaders directed their vehemence against those untouchables who were suspected to have taken a lead in the matter of the admission of their children in the village school. They broke open their doors, and not finding them in, they broke the tiles and rafters of the roofs over their houses. Terror stricken, these untouchables, men and women who were assaulted and beaten, were anxious about the safety of those of their elders who had gone to Dholka and who were expected back that night. The caste Hindus, knowing that the leaders of the untouchables who had gone to Dholka would be returning, had concealed themselves behind the bushes and shrubs on the way to the village. Having come to know of this, an old untouchable woman sneaked out of the village in the dark, met the leaders who were returning, and informed them that armed gangs of caste Hindus were hiding themselves to waylay them, and that therefore they should not come into the village. They refused to listen, fearing that the caste Hindus might do greater mischief in their absence. At the same time, they were afraid that if they did enter the village, they might be assaulted. They therefore decided to wait outside the village in the field after midnight. In the meantime, the gang of caste Hindus who were in ambush waited and finally gave up the game and retired. The leaders of the untouchable entered the village after about 3 a.m. in the night. If they had come earlier and met the murderous gang, they would have probably been done to death. On seeing the harm done to person and property, they left the village for Ahmedabad before daybreak and informed the secretary of the Edward Sevak Sangh, a body organized by Mr. Gandhi, to look after the welfare of the untouchables. But the secretary was helpless. Not only did the caste Hindus use physical violence, but they conspired to make the life of the untouchables intolerable. They refused to engage them as laborers, they refused to sell them foodstuffs, they refused to give them facilities for grazing their cattle, and they used to commit stray assaults on untouchable men and women. Not only this, but the caste Hindus in their frenzy poured kerosene oil in the well from which the untouchables used to get their supply of drinking water. This they did for days together. The result was that the untouchables of the village had no water. When things reached this stage, the untouchables thought of filing criminal complaints before a magistrate, which then they did on 17th October, making some of the caste Hindus as the accused. The strange part of the case is the part played by Mr. Gandhi and his henchman Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. With all the knowledge of tyranny and oppression practiced by the caste Hindus of Kavitha against the untouchables, all that Mr. Gandhi felt like doing was to advise the untouchables to leave the village. He did not even suggest that the miscreant should be hauled up before a court of law. His henchman, Mr. Vallabhbhai Patel, played a part which was still more strange. He had gone to Kavitha to persuade the caste Hindus not to molest the untouchables, but they did not even give him a hearing. Yet, this very man was opposed to the untouchables hauling them up in a court of law and getting them punished. The untouchables filed the complaint notwithstanding his position. But he ultimately forced them to withdraw the complaint on the caste Hindus, making some kind of a show of an understanding not to molest, an undertaking which the untouchables can never enforce. The result was that the untouchables suffered and that tyrants escaped with the aid of Mr. Gandhi's friend, Mr. Vallabhbhai Patel. The end.